Everybody, welcome to the July Ask Tom Database Security Office Hours. My name is Richard Evans, and I'll be your host today. Today, we're talking about Virtual Private Database, also known as Row-Level Security, RLS, also known as Fine-Grained Access Control, FGAC. If you heard any of those three terms, and we're talking about those products, which is one, Oracle Virtual Private Database. So I was going to be joined by Dan Morgan today, and I feel like I conducted a bait and switch here on you. Dan had a customer call that came up, and so he had to hop on that call instead. You know, customers are more important than hanging out with me for an hour. Yeah, that's probably right. So he made the right choice. So I don't think Dan's going to join us today, but he might pop his head in here if he has a chance. So this call is being recorded. It will be available on the Ask Tom platform, 7 days or so after the presentation. We've got 4 years worth of data back there. I should probably look it up at some point because we've got so many presentations out there, but we found we'd never done a presentation on Virtual Private Database. So we are making that today and rectifying that. So you can go to bit.ly/AskTomDBSec. Click on all sessions. You can see everything in there. And then I'll paste this in the chat where you can get to that bit.ly link and then a GitHub link too that I'll explain in a minute. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. Thank you for joining. This is a monthly call that Database Security Product Development puts on. Sessions available to everybody, whether you're a customer or not an Oracle customer. We talk about announcements, kind of things going on, relevant things, a technical topic, and then a Q&A at the end. So we hold this on the second Wednesday of every month at 10 a.m. U.S. Central. Even with the time change, we try to keep it at 10 a.m. U.S. Central. So please add this to your calendar. Join us next month. If you have suggestions for things you'd like us to cover, please drop it in the chat or the Q&A here, and we'll do our best to see if we can cover it for you. So, all right, some announcements here. So this was the GitHub link that I just referred to. So I pasted this in the chat. There's a QR code here for you to blast. If you go out to github.com or a DBSec, ask Tom DB Security. We've got a year's worth of links and notes and support topics and any sample code we use for these presentations, hopefully allowing you to sit back and, you know, have your coffee instead of going, oh, wait, I got to remember that. I got to remember that. So we want you to enjoy the presentation a little bit more and have something to refer back to if you share it with someone else or if you watch it later. Every month we talk about patching. Quarterly patching will come out on or around the 18th of July, so a week from yesterday. There's a couple primary notes and recommended one-off patches out there that you should look at. So those My Oracle support documents are key. For critical patch updates, check out oracle.com/security-alerts. If you are a real application cluster customer, if you're using RAC, check out Fleet Patching and Provisioning as a way to create gold images and hopefully improve your patching process for grid infrastructure and database. And then, as always, Mike Dietrich is the man. Go check out his blog at mikedietrichde.com for information around patches and upgrades to the Oracle installation. Okay. Going from traditional auditing to unified audit is going to be key for you guys in the next year or so. Hopefully you're already on 19C. And then when 23C comes out, you'll start to look at it and say, okay, here's how it would fit into our environment. Here's how we can use it. Here are the benefits on why we would upgrade. But just understand that when you go to 23C, traditional auditing is de-supported. So we're going to want you to start to look at these unified audit policies if you haven't already. There's a really good My Oracle support note out there that talks about that, and that QR code will take you there, or that GitHub link that I have shared will take you there too. So take a look at that. Now, this thing isn't going to solve all your problems. It is going to give you a general idea of how to do like a one-to-one transfer. But look at syscontext, look at component, look at top level, look at exceptions, look at the things you can do with unified audit that you couldn't do or couldn't do as easily with traditional audit, okay? And Dan pointed out when we were going over this that there's a script out there in the DBMS admin directory called securityconfig.sql that kind of shows you the difference between the traditional auditing, and the unified audit. So if you take a look at that script, you'll see if it's an 11G database, it'll give you the choice for audit. If it's a 12C database, it'll create it in the new unified audit policy syntax there. So yeah, cool script that just kind of gives you an idea of, okay, what maybe the syntactical differences are. But so does this, policy generator there too. That'll help you with that, okay? And then also remember with 23C, it is container databases. So there's no more, standalone. There's no more traditional or non-multi-tenant installation. 23C is that container and pluggable database installation there. So, some big changes with 23C, but good changes, and unified auditing is one of them. So for today's presentation on virtual private database, I've got some notes here. Again, these are in the GitHub link, and I will share this in the chat again in case you came in late. But what I would recommend is starting with that primary note if you have any issues. Chapter 15 of the Database Security Guide in the 23C edition is where you'll find virtual private database, and I'll show you that guide here during the demonstration. But what you'll want to do is just keep a bookmark on that document maybe. How to generate tracing could be a good one too. But for the most part, the document does a good job. Dan Morgan's library has some really good examples out there too. Tim Hall always does a good job with examples. And so there's lots of resources out there, but just understand that you've got resources within Oracle support as well. So we've updated the Database Security LiveLabs out there. So just in the last week or so, Hakeem has updated these images to be Oracle Key Vault 21.6, AutoVault Database 20.9, a Oracle Enterprise Manager Release Update 14, and then the latest Database Enterprise Edition 19.9. So that latest release update there. So we've got all of those updates out there for you to kick the tires on and try out our technology. So that QR code will take you there, get you started. The cool thing is most of these labs are available with that green button you see on the screen there, run on LiveLab Sandbox, which means that it's free of charge. It's on Oracle's dime. You register there and you can spin this up. And you can try out that unified audit. You could try out virtual private database. You can try out a lot of different technology there. You can follow the lab, or you could be like Evil Rich and go, what happens if I do this instead, right? So you can go off script there too. So it gives you a 2-hour, 4-hour time limit on that lab. And then, you can learn something really easily on Oracle's dime. LiveLabs is such a cool technology. And we have a new lab out there that can kind of help you understand the combination of advanced compression and transparent data encryption. This is the question we get quite a bit is, hey, we're doing encryption, but we're seeing, loss and deduplication or compression or these things. How can we use these technologies together? So we talk about combining ACO and ASO together, the advanced compression option and the advanced security option. Walks you through this lab here on doing maybe an online redefinition, verifying space benefits, using the compression advisor, all sorts of good stuff there. The link and the QR code is available on the screen. Now, there is not a green button there on that yet. It will be there. It's just, it takes us a couple extra weeks to get, those I's dotted and T's crossed and everything for us to provide that to you. But at least we put this out here first for you to be able to run on your tenancy. And even if you decide you want to do it in your environment or, on a green button environment, you could probably pretty much follow the lab and do it in your own environment, kind of get an idea of what we're doing and how we're doing it and why we're doing it and stuff. So cool. Another live lab out there for you to learn and get your hands on Oracle database security products. Okay. 23C free developer release came out back in March, I think it was. Kick the tires on that at oracle.com/23C free. Lots of really good changes in there. Schema only privileges are a really exciting one. So you don't have to create a trigger or something to grant selects. You don't have to grant select any table. You can grant, read on a particular schema. One of the things we'd really like you to kick the tires on and give us feedback on is Oracle SQL Firewall, where we've taken some of those components from AutoVault and Database Firewall, that Database Firewall component, brought it into the kernel of the database with 23C. And then we're allowing you to make some of those decisions and control SQL statements and restrict connection paths and, lots of cool stuff there that just gives you another tool in your toolkit with this defense in depth kind of capability that Oracle provides, to protect your sensitive data, your critical data there. So the QR code will take you out to the hands-on demo script. And then there is a demo video out there on YouTube as well. And I believe I've put that in the GitHub repository as well, which I'll share again one more time here in case folks came in late. And give SQL Firewall a kick in the tires, for us and for yourself. Okay. So let's get started here. I'm going to pretend like I'm Dan Morgan here for a minute. I wish Dan could have joined us, but if you came in late, he had a customer call that he prioritized over hanging out with me. I would be offended, but Dan made the right decision. So Dan's a great technician, and if they need his help, then I'm glad he can help. So we put this presentation together. If you have any questions for me or for Dan, you're welcome to email us at any time and just say, hey, you said this, but that doesn't make sense to me. Or, well, I'm trying to do this, how can we do that with VPD or with any kind of the database security technology? So today we're going to talk about VPD. I want to ask you guys a quick question. We're going to talk about what VPD is, some business cases, how to use it, how it works, and then I'll give you a demonstration and we'll get to a Q&A at the end of the presentation. You're welcome to drop those questions in the Q&A as you think of them. I probably won't see them as we're going along since I'm flying solo here, but if it's relevant and I see it, we'll respond at the time or we'll just catch it at the end, okay? So if you guys could, in the chat, it should just go directly to us as hosts here, is what is your experience with VPD? Have you ever used virtual private database or row-level security or fine-grained access control, the three names that we give to VPD? So feel free to put that in the chat there. If you have, what is your experience with it? Like, what are some of those use cases that you've used it for? Like, what were you successful with? I know when we did this for partners yesterday, we had some that talked about their experience with EBS and how EBS uses VPD. So we're getting some response here, and it sounds like we've got some folks who are new to VPD, which is great because this is really what this presentation is geared toward, is kind of a back to basics, a understanding of what virtual private database is and how you can utilize it. So, all right, so VPD is a security feature that is included in every Oracle Enterprise Edition license since 8.15. So if you're like Dan and you're this old curmudgeon who's been using Oracle since the 90s, he's not here, darn it. And it's been out there since Oracle 8i. It really is just a fantastic tool that I think a lot of folks kind of take for granted sometime or overlook here, right? So what it does is it enhances the security inside of the database kernel. So regardless of where that SQL statement is coming from, whether it's compiled in an application, generated with dynamic SQL, or comes from, me sitting there at the keyboard with SQL Plus, it is going to append this predicate to it. So whether it's a select statement, insert, update, delete, merge, or an index, database VPD will work on this. So here on the screen, you're going to see this kind of before and after example. So if you've got this payroll example and a user runs a query or the application runs a query, it's going to just run it with that, country code is US, but that's going to return all the employees in the payroll in the United States. That could be 70,000 people if you're here at Oracle. Now, maybe your payroll responsibility is a little more, narrowly defined than that. So virtual private database can automatically append these additional clauses to your where statement. So it can add in the division, it can add in the department, it can add this syntax to the end of it that the application didn't do or doesn't know about, that's done, at runtime there. So it can't be modified. So really, really powerful stuff that you can use to then add this business logic to it. And so when we talk about business logic, like what we mean here are some of these business cases that we have with VPD. So I could talk about the technology till I'm blue in the face, but you're like, well, how would I use it? What would I use it for? What does that do? It sounds neat, but so in this kind of same example, let's say the application that you bought or was developed for you allows managers to query employee salary, but it doesn't limit them to only seeing employees that report to them. Like, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we never thought about this stuff, right? Like this wasn't a security concern to us. It was, hey, the data's in there. If you have access, then you have access. But 2023, no. You don't need to see all those salaries there. So with VPD, you can apply this here to limit that without the application realizing it. So we can further restrict that. So this is a really cool use case that we've got here. We're worried that an attacker could gain access to our credit card table and steal all the credit cards with a SQL injection. We need a way to make sure that no query can ever return more than 12 credit cards. I mean, that is spot on. So these are Dan's examples, and they're so great because he's done this in real life, right? And so that is a really, really, really relevant example, medical records as well, right? And I thought, man, 12 credit cards, that's a lot. Why not one? Well, I guess between my wife and my kids, we've got 4. So, okay, maybe 4, maybe 12 is a little high. But the point there is that we can limit it to X number and decide that we should never return more than that in a single query like this. So very powerful stuff. Number 3, we had an incident where someone wrote an update statement to fix some records and accidentally updated every record in that table. Okay, with VPD, we could apply a predicate, a where clause that limits the rows that user could update. So they could never update every row in that table, right? I've been guilty of making mistakes with update tables, update statements. Fortunately, I've been able to roll it back, but yeah, that would be a fantastic addition to an update statement there. Other hospitals in our area have had narcotics stolen from the pharmacy by orders being inserted into a table with 100 pills rather than 10 the doctor ordered. We need to be able to limit all orders for controlled substances to no more than 30 without modifying the application. So this was a real life situation that Dan was talking about yesterday when we did this for the Oracle Partner Network. And what they used is a lookup table. So because virtual private database VPD policies are PL SQL based, they're a function. You can call, let's say, a table that you've written to say, okay, this drug is being asked to be ordered. The lookup table says the max we could ever order of those drugs is 10, is 20, is 30, or maybe there's a time frame on how frequently that drug could be reordered for that patient. So there's rules that you could put in place. There's business logic that you can apply after the fact, right? So the application or the user runs the insert. Wait, that didn't do what I wanted. Why is that? Oh, because VPD said, oh, I have to append this on here. So we're not going to let you order more than 30 without an override there. So very powerful stuff. And then finally, contractors who work for us should only be able to access our systems during their regular business hours, but their access to the VPN gives them 7, 24, 365 access. We want to put their work schedules in a table and block access whenever they are not scheduled to work. Yeah, I think that's a really pretty useful tool there that you have, right? You could limit what they can do based on the time of day or the network they're coming from or some of the credentials they're using, so there's lots of things you can do with VPD that can solve real world business use cases there. So, all right, what makes it versatile and powerful? You already own it, right? Everywhere that you're using the Oracle database, whether it's on-prem, Oracle Cloud, those other clouds, Exadata systems, Exadata Cloud at Customer, Exadata Cloud Services, then you can use VPD because it's a part of Enterprise Edition. You already own it and it's built into this. So if you're using Autonomous Database, if you're using Autonomous Data Warehouse, you can use Virtual Private Database, okay? Policies form kind of one or more rule there that you apply to the table, to the view, or to the synonym, and they're located inside the kernel of the database. So we are securing the data at the data layer, right? So when that query is executed, the database appends it, and then there's no modifications to it after that. And then we've got that there, right? Rules are written very simply or complex. We're going to show you some simple examples today with PL SQL that returns a string that is transparently added. So city is Toronto is my example. Department ID is 30, where, employee ID is in the managers group, things like that that you can do. But then you can go a little further with it too. So your functions can be driven by what the database knows about that session. So application information, you can set the client info, which is what I'll do in our demonstration today, setting modules, setting actions, this stuff that you can pass to the database about where in the application we are can be used to make decisions with VPD policies. Dan was talking about using JMS through advanced queuing to do this and to, have VPD involved here and stuff. Things that I've never used JMS and advanced queuing much. So things that I didn't know, but because it's PL SQL based, because it's in the kernel of the database, basically the power of the Oracle database is there for you to use with VPD. Functions can be written as standalone functions or in PL SQL packages. You can use static or dynamic, there's lots of things you can do here. So if you're just writing one, like we are in our example, maybe we just create a function. If we're going to have a function, multiple functions, and then multiple policies on multiple tables, then maybe we create a PL SQL package and we store all those functions in a package. And then we use VPD policy groups, which I'll talk about here in a little bit, just to simplify and to kind of create some order with how we're doing it. So real powerful stuff that we've got here. And then we use the DBMS RLS package to kind of do this API, to apply the policy, to update the policy, to do the controls around it. So again, remember, VPD is called RLS, row level security. It's called fine grain access control as well. But you've got that DBMS RLS package, and I'll show you the 6 or so lines that it takes to apply a policy. So this is what we can do, and this is what makes VPD so powerful as a tool, okay? All right, so again, simply put, we've got this query. Evil Rich runs select star from HR.employees because he wants to see everybody's information. VPD comes back and says, sorry, buddy, I'm going to add this predicate. So the query only becomes where email equals looking at my username and appending @oracle.com to it. Foiled, right? So we can do this and the query never changed. It changed within the optimizer there, it changed within the kernel. A more advanced use case might be, okay, we're not going to match you just to employees because you're a manager. We're going to allow you to do a select star from employees, but we're going to append this manager ID equals this custom context, right? So sys context, a lot of times we use user env to get session user, maybe host name, IP address, information about the session that I'm connected with. We can create our own to identify maybe the manager context. So what is the manager's user ID in this scenario? And does it match and return only the employees that have me as a manager, right? And then, yeah, we probably want to append something about, okay, the employees are still valid employees. And if they do have an end date, maybe they're on a contract, they're consultants, and their end date is 31 December, at least it's before or it's after today, right? So we want to make sure that that it's not, they're not expired there. So the stuff in yellow is appended by virtual private database to the session, to the query when it's executed there, when it's run. So real powerful stuff, a simple example, a little more complex example there. And what happens is this is done through this function that we create. And I'll show you what it looks like when we get to the demo. The function applies that where clause. So if you look on the right-hand side in yellow, we've got 2 inputs that the function for a VPD policy takes. It has to take the schema name and the object name. You can give them, I think, different v-name variable names there instead, but it takes these two in as varchar 2s, and then it returns a varchar 2 as well. So in this scenario, when we get into the begin and end of this function, we look at the context of the user session. So we're looking to see who the session user is, and we're checking to see if they are either Scott or HR. If they are, we don't add a predicate. We just return null. So the query runs as it was. If they are not either of those users, then we're going to limit them to department ID is 30. That's pretty arbitrary, right? We probably want to get a little more advanced than that, but that's as simple as it can be, right? You can return 1 equals 0, so no rows returned to them, right? So just that simple on how you create a PL SQL function to define this business logic there. Okay. Now, one of the things also to note is that this runs as a definer writes. So it always runs as definer. It never runs as the invoker. So it never runs as the user who invokes the query, invokes the function. It runs as the user who defined it there. So, I mean, that's a little more advanced there, nuanced there, but you just need to know that it takes 2 inputs, well, you know, 1 export, 2 inputs, 1 output. Output was the word I'm looking for. Okay. So after we've created the function, then what we're going to do is we're going to use this DBMS RLS API, this package, and we're going to add a policy. So in this scenario here, we're going to add it to HR employees table. We're going to add the policy name, just call it secure update. We can give it any name we want. And then that policy function that we created in the previous step, check updates, we're going to add that and use that function. And we're going to do it for select statements and for update statements. That simple. Okay. We could choose insert, we could choose index, we could choose delete. But in this scenario, I just wanted to specify 2 of them there that we could apply. So this is row level security. So what we're doing is deciding how many rows can get selected, how many rows could get updated by appending this to the employees table. Now, one of the really cool things about virtual private database is it not only does row level security, it does column level security too. So let's say that I should be able to see all the rows in the table, but I just shouldn't be able to see certain columns, right? So with VPD, you could say, well, rows, not that important, right? Like, I mean, there's 1,000 rows in the table. Okay. But what I really don't want them to see is the salary or the commission, or in our example, I'll show you is the personally identifiable information, social security number, national identifier number. We can specify the security relevant columns parameter and then say, okay, I want this to apply to these 2 columns. And now VPD, you have a choice. It can either return only the rows that the user can see those columns for, or it could return all the rows and then just null out those 2 columns. So real powerful stuff here. So we can do both column and row level security with VPD, which I guess is why it's got 3 names, with virtual private database, row level security, as well as fine grained access control. So column adds that fine grained access control kind of capability to VPD. Okay. Now, one of the things that you're going to ask is, well, Rich, I'm concerned about performance, and rightfully so. You certainly can, you know, be your own worst enemy when it comes to performance in VPD, depending on how you write that policy and, you know, how elaborate you get with that policy function, right? So if you're going to do a bunch of table calls and, you know, manipulate some data and, you know, calculate astrological signs, then yeah, you're probably going to add some performance overhead to your query. But one of the ways we try to minimize that here is by a policy type. In my example, I've defined it as dynamic, which means every time that select, insert, update, or delete is run, I want to go ahead and re-execute that policy function. Probably not the best for performance reasons. Maybe if you're doing a delete and you're not doing deletes very often, maybe, but I would probably use something more like context sensitive, where it reevaluates if it detects context changes. So if there's something about that session that changes, then we're going to reevaluate those and we're going to rerun that policy function again at that point in time. So you kind of go from two extremes, right? Dynamic, run it every time. Static, only run it, basically at the beginning of the session. And then that happy medium may be in there that says, well, let's reevaluate it if something changes. So you've got some control over this. And again, it may depend on what your function's doing. If your function is only looking at static parameters about the session, like what IP you logged in from, what program you used, what host name you're on, well, those don't change for the session, right? I mean, if you were going to change programs, you'd have to log out and log back in using Toad instead of SQL Developer or vice versa. So you might use static. So you just want to look at what your business logic is like and then make that decision for yours. So I'd probably err on context sensitive and split the difference there a little bit. So, but up to you. So as you grow with VPD kind of grows with you. You can kind of put things in database policy groups. So you can say, okay, this applies to this application, and we want to designate this application context to indicate this policy group is in effect. And so you've got some capabilities there to group it together and create some logic. A little outside of the scope of this presentation, but just understand that, as you work with VPD, you can create these policy groups to go along with it to better manage the collection of policies you've got there. Okay. So just to kind of summarize what you're going to do with VPD is go to the docs, download the database security guide, download the PL/SQL packages type reference. So you have that VPD chapter. And then you have the DBMS RLS package example. So the documentation does a pretty good job. If there's a typo, if there's a mistake, like smash that, feedback button or email me and say, hey, Rich, you guys screwed this up. Please, 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 please. We look at these documentation nonstop, and yet we miss typos that have been there for 10 years. So, we just become immune to it. And we're just so used to it. So use the documentation as much as you can and provide feedback for us. Create a sample user, grant the appropriate privileges, create that function. Remember, it just takes the input of the schema, the object. You don't really use them in there. VPD uses them when you apply it to the object, when you apply that function and policy to the object. And then the output is just a varchar2 with a valid where clause. So you can always just test it first, right? So run it in SQL Plus. Okay, I want to append department is 30. Did I get my syntax right? Yep. Okay, good. So put that in your return character there. Determine whether your policy applies to rows, tables, or both. Rows, columns, or both. I'm sorry. And then make that decision. Add it to a table, a view, or a synonym. And I'll be honest, this is something I didn't think about when we started putting this presentation together, is you could apply a policy to a synonym or a view, but have the table still function without the policy. So if you had a set of users that you wanted to have this apply to, maybe rather than creating that business logic and have it apply to everybody, create synonyms for them, have them go at the synonyms, and then apply that VPD policy there. So really a neat little nuance there that you can do because VPD policies support tables, views, and synonyms. Okay. And then optionally add it to a policy group if you got to that advanced level there. Okay. So after performance, the next question is, Rich, we have like 10 things that do this, don't we? Yes and no. Yes and no, right? Security is defense in depth. Security is overlapping capabilities. The ones that come to mind for me are Oracle Label Security, Oracle Data Redaction, and Oracle Real Application Security. So they kind of do similar things. They approach it from different angles. They have different capabilities. So it really just depends. And as Dan said yesterday, look at your use cases, give them a try, throw that spaghetti at the wall, see which one works best for you. So, for example, VPD does not perform transformation. With data redaction, we could have data returned that would only show the last four of the credit card, last four of the social security number. VPD just returns null. It doesn't get into any of that transformation on the column. So if that's a requirement for you, then data redaction is a better choice. VPD does require you to create some PL SQL, right? It requires you to create that function and build that business logic there. But I would also argue that that's the benefit of it, right? That's the strength. It provides that most flexibility for you compared to other solutions. Oracle Label Security supports hierarchical data security models. And what I mean by that is with label security, you could create this hierarchy of, the global company, Germany, and then UK, Canada, United States. And you could have it where if you're in the global group, you have access to those subordinate groups as well. VPD, I'm not quite sure how you could do that. You could probably write some business logic to get close, but label security allows you to create that. It hides a column on there. It gives it a numerical value, so you can do comparisons between rows and find like the least the greatest lower bound and the least upper bound, and lots of really cool stuff that you can do with label security to do comparisons of maybe my class clearance level versus your clearance level, or what I should have access to versus you. VPD, not so much. Business decisions based on, context primarily, right? Real application security, we call next generation VPD. It doesn't mean VPD is going away. Virtual private database is around for the foreseeable future. It's such a rock solid technology that's used by so many customers that I don't see it going away anytime soon. Real application security is our effort to kind of add to that and create security attributes, privileges, and kind of create it as a to involve the application users as well, not just the database users there. So if you're doing something maybe with Apex, real application security might be a better choice for you there. So, different tools for different jobs. Yesterday, I joked that all of these are hammers. They're just different types of hammers, right? One's a mallet, one's a ballpoint hammer, one's a sledgehammer. I mean, it just really depends. They may be all tools from kind of the same type, but they approach the problem just a little bit differently there. Cool. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and share I'm gonna post in here kind of the bit.ly link again, and then our GitHub link again. And then I'm gonna show you our demonstration here. So what I've done is I've taken the Database Security Basics Lab and I've created a downloadable VPD script for you. And then what you would do is you would download this VPD tar file to that LiveLab compute instance using like wget. So just wget file name, download that, and then it'll walk you through the lab. We are in the process of creating a separate VPD LiveLab. I just couldn't get it done in time for this presentation this month, but it will be out there in the future. But I want you to have something that you could get your hands on right now if you want to play with virtual private database. So let me show you how this would work. Okay, so if you go out to Google, and it may be the first, it may not be the first, LiveLabs, Oracle Security Basics. For me, Database Security Basics is the first one, and I come back to it. And then this allows you to spin up this virtual machine on Oracle's dime. So if you click Start, you're going to see two options here. You can run it in your own tenancy, and if you want it around for a while, and this is a pretty cool virtual machine, you can have it in your OCI tenancy as long as you want, or you can run it in our sandbox, what we call the green button. The green button allows you to run it for a couple hours on our dime, and then it provides you with a link so you can get into it and everything. So you would spin up this Database Security Basics here, and then you would navigate to the Ask Tom GitHub repository. And then I've got July's Back to Basics virtual private database out there. And then I've got those notes and everything I talked about today. Chapter 15, using virtual private database. That's a good link. The MOS notes, the LiveLab for advanced compression and TDE. And then here is the Oracle VPD LiveLab. So provision this guy, and then you can download the TAR, so the tape archive here, from my object store that has the scripts for you. So I've already done this. I've already downloaded this. And what I'll do is just show you what that looks like when I have unpacked it here. All right, so I've got our, just a README. It really is a lame README. It just shows you kind of the order to run the scripts in. I have not added as much color commentary as I should have here, but just walks you through the individual steps. I encourage you to look at each of these and get an idea of what's happening with these scripts if you want to do it. But really the first thing is what we want to do is we want to query the policies. We have no policies out there. And so no VPD policies are in effect for my environment here. And then what I want to do next is I want to query the employee data. So this is the data that I want to protect here. So we've got information about the user, but most importantly, we've got, whether they've got a social security number, social identifier number, or national identifier number, depending on where in the world they are. We want to protect this data. Now, to add to this lab, if you've used any of our database security labs before, we've got this amazing Glassfish application here that is really riddled with holes. It's really vulnerable to SQL injection. It's insecure. And we want to demonstrate how we can secure an application like this without modifying the application. So if I logged in as my HR admin, I want to take a look at Cynthia. I can see her social security number. I can see this information. I can go back. I can check out Frank. I can see Frank's ID and his information here too. So the application functions, I can see that same data in SQL+. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create our row level function. So I'll create the row level function called VPD app user. And let me show you what that looks like. It's a really, really simple function. Remember before I showed you we did something like this? All we're doing is looking at who the session user is. If it's employee search prod, which is the user that runs the application, then they don't get a predicate. If it's anyone else, then we don't want them to see any rows. So we're going to return 1 equals 0. 1 equals 0 can never be true. Maybe if you're a math major, you're going to say, well, technically, Rich, as we get toward infinite numbers, no. In SQL, 1 can never equal 0. All right. So we've got that there. And then what we do is we apply the function. So we created the function, and then we want to apply a policy to the table utilizing that. And again, like I showed you before in the slides, really simple 6 or 7 lines here where we add the policy to the table. We give it a policy name. There is the function schema owner that owns that policy. There's our policy name. And then remember, I'm using dynamic. I'd probably use static in this case because that session user doesn't change. Maybe I'd use context sensitive, but either way, I'm providing it as a dynamic policy type here. Now, when we run this query again to select the employee data, we're going to see something different here. Employee search sees all the data. Remember, because the current user, the session user is employee search prod. But our database administrator, Deborah, she has DBA privileges. She now sees no data from here, right? Real quick and easy. Same query, added the policy. Deborah does not see that data when she runs that query she ran just 30 seconds ago. Now, the key is, hey, Rich, did you mess up the application? And I am happy to tell you, fingers crossed, I did not mess up the application because our application utilizes that employee search prod user. So Frank, we can still see that. If I look at this metadata here associated with my session, the context information, we can see that I'm logged in. My identity is employee search prod, schema is employee search prod, current user is employee search prod, session user way down here is employee search prod. So we are using this kind of 3-tier application design where the database user, the application logs in as a database user, and then the application users are really just rows in a table. Our HR admin is really just a row in a table. And a lot of applications do this. And then what they do is they identify who the user is based on maybe a client identifier or some of that data that we talked about earlier where we can get application information. So here I know that I am really logged in as HR admin to the application. Behind the scenes, it logs in as our schema account, and then we're controlling things that way. Okay, so we've controlled the rows and who can return the rows here. Let's try returning and controlling the columns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this row policy, and then I'm going to create a column function and then create a column policy. And I'll show you what these look like. Column policy. So this column function is basically the same thing. All I added here was the context, right? Because I realized that somebody could just use SQL Plus as that schema user, log in and still see that data like I did here in SQL Plus. I want to add an additional condition on here that says your client identifier must be set to HR admin and it'll return null, right? So no predicate will be added. If you cannot meet those two criteria, then 1 equals 0. You don't see any data. So let's try our query again. Oh, actually, no, I'm sorry. I need to show you what the policy looks like on those columns. So our policy here is our policy that adds it, dynamic again, and here I specified Social Security, SIN, and National Identifier Number. And then I also added this additional policy here that says all rows. So I want to return these rows. I just don't want to return those columns. So it'll null out those columns for users who do not meet our, our two criteria for user and client identifier. So let's run this guy again. Query employee data. Deborah sees data now, right? But look, Deborah does not see any of the national identifier numbers here. She does not see any of this data. Like, that's huge, right? Like, Deborah can do her job. She may be able to look through there and help troubleshoot things with the business, but she cannot see their identifying data here, right? Same thing here. I logged in as a schema using SQL Plus. I can see the data, but I cannot see this identifying information because that's not where I should see it. I should only see it through the application or when I've met the criteria that's in the business logic of my function. Remember, I've client identifier. I've added that and I can do that now. So let's take a look. Let's make sure that our user here can see the data in the application still. Again, search, Cynthia Adams. Cynthia Adams sees that information. Search, Frank Adams. Frank Adams information comes back. So the application functions as expected, right? Now, let's say, okay, Rich, we want to get a little more advanced maybe with our logic. We've got Candace, Canadian Candy, who is our HR representative, who may need to see some of this data, payroll, whatever she is. When she logs in, her client identifier has changed from HR admin to her username. So we have got some context, some information about her, right? We search and Cynthia Adams doesn't see, she can't see Cynthia Adams information. We search, she can't see Frank's information either, right? Because she was not a part of that criteria. It was only checking for the HR admin for that client identifier. So let's get a little more advanced here and update that column function to include our Canadian user too. So here I'm demonstrating that we can put in an additional condition. So I've got my first condition here. and then returns null, so no predicate. I've got my next condition here, which checks to see the session user, just to make sure the application here is connecting. And then the client identifier is our Canadian Candy, and she gets information back based on users whose city column matches Toronto, right? Everybody else, 1 equals 0. You don't see that data still. All right, so let's run it here again and see if we see any changes. VPD, query, employees. Nope, Deborah sees the data, but she doesn't see our sensitive columns. Employee search prod sees our data, but it doesn't see our sensitive columns. And now when Candace sees our data, let's go back here and let's run it again. So now our Candy user, she sees social identifier number. So we've got our Toronto user here of Cynthia Adams. And then when she tries to look at maybe Frank, who's in Berlin, she doesn't see that information because that's not her area of responsibility. So very easily, very quickly, we can start to build some business logic inside of this PL/SQL function to make these decisions. And you're going to want to get a lot more advanced than, you know, what I've done with my my little slides here that kind of show 1 equals 0 or return null or any of this, right? So explore it, give it a try. But again, remember that when you're running these, the thing you want to do is try it in SQL first. So try it in SQL Developer, try it in SQL Plus, and just make sure that that predicate is valid when you're trying to apply it. If it doesn't work in SQL Plus, then it won't work in VPD. Real quickly, just a couple troubleshooting steps that I would recommend. I got these out of the My Oracle support note that talked about troubleshooting VPD. If you want, you can alter the session and set this 10.730 trace and then get information on it. So what you'll see in your trace directory looks something like this. We can see the query that I've executed. And then if you look at the very bottom of that, you can see the predicate returned 1 equals 0. So you can get an idea of like, okay, wait, which predicate was run during this? Because I don't feel like I'm getting the results that I should get here. So you can see that. Another example here, same kind of query. I mean, the query is exactly the same, right? So that query on line 4, user SQL, is exactly the same in both examples. But what has changed there is that last line where that predicate returned has now changed to city equals Toronto. So if you are trying to troubleshoot some VPD issues on the database server, you can do your session and then run this. You could do it for system and then get all the trace for all the sessions. You could get a little more advanced with how you collect your trace, maybe by session ID or something there. But the point is that you can get this information so you can kind of step through how that policy and which policy predicate might have been applied to that query. So powerful stuff, man. Real powerful stuff here. Okay, again, I put all this out on our GitHub page, so you can download that tape archive, that tar file, and walk through that. You can go through and check out that database security basics or really any of our database security labs and try them out there and kick the tires on this VPD lab. I hope to have that lab out here available for a green button lab in the next, 6 weeks or so. With Cloud World coming up, timelines are compressed on this, so we'll see. And then next month, we hope to see you back here on our Ask Tom Database Security Office Hours. It'll be Wednesday, August 9th. So about as early in August as it can be. I have not thought about what the topic will be. Please shoot me an email. Let me know if you have any questions or if you have any suggestions for topics.